Short barrels, 45 ACP versus 357 Magnum. What I have today is our Speer gold dot ammunition. So I've tested quite a bit of 45 ACP rounds through the short barrel pistol here. And what I've tested in the past is the 230 grain short barrel, the 200 grain plus P carry gun, and the regular 200 grain plus P. But what we have today is our basic 185 grain standard pressure 45 ACP. I'm going to compare that to our standard pressure gold dot 357 Magnum. Neither of these are the short barrel variants, so we just want to see how these things will do in short barrels. So I'm going to use my Smith & Wesson Shield 45 to test the 45 ACP. It's a 3.2 inch barrel, and to test the 357 Magnum I'm using my Taurus 605 with a 2-inch barrel. Actual barrel travel is about the same with both of those, even though they have different barrel lengths because the way that the semi-auto is measured and all that. So this should be a really fair comparison. And by the way, that 45 ACP is rated at 1,050 feet per second, and our 357 Magnum is rated at 1,450 feet per second. So we're going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy we get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic gel test. So I'm going to go in the plain 10% clear ballistics gel to see what the best potential of those are. No fabric or anything like that in the way that can clog a hollow point, so we can see how these bullets are supposed to perform. Then after that, I'm going to move on to doing more of a real world simulation. 4 layers of sweatshirt material on this first 3-inch piece that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4-inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. In that format, clear ballistics is roughly half representation of the density of flesh. So if you got like 16 inches in this gel through the real world simulation, it's more like 8 inches in a real living target. So we'll do our plain clear ballistic gel shot, then our real world simulation shot, and then I will shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up we have our 45 ACP 185 grain rated at 1,050 feet per second. I believe that rating is through a 5-inch barrel, so we're not going to get that through this little 3.2-inch barrel. So let's see what we get here with our 45 ACP 185 grain. .854, 920, 915, 899, 882. So that's pretty typical velocity for a 45 ACP out of a short barrel. And there's a standard pressure 357 Magnum 125 grain. This uses the deep curl hollow point gold dot, a little bit different design. I'm not sure what kind of recoil this is going to have, so I'm going to fire these single action because there's no point in looking cool and firing double action in front of a chronograph if I might jerk those shots. So 357 Magnum, let's see how this does. 12-12, those have a lot of blast and recoil. 12-19, 12-16, 12-05, 12-36. So relatively consistent, but you know, that feels like hitting a tree with a baseball bat. That's got quite a bit of recoil there. That's why I'm kind of holding it loose, because I can absorb it a little bit better without it causing too much pain. But definitely full power load out of this. Let's let our ballistics gel block and see how these compare. All right, first up, our plain clear ballistics shot. No fabric in the way that could potentially clog a hollow point. No rib simulation in the way that could potentially slow down its penetration. I got the chronograph set in front. This may or may not pick up the reads. But let's see what we get here with our 45 ACP. Plain clear ballistics. 899 feet per second. You know, let me do that one more time. 906 feet per second. 357 Magnum, plain clear ballistics. 1228 feet per second. Let's go take a look. All right, so that first shot went down and hit the bottom of that shelf there, so I'm not going to count that because that could slow down its potential for penetration. So I did fire another shot, and honestly, this looks pretty good for what it is. With both of the 45 and the 357 Magnum, you know, the 45 has a little less energy dump than the 357, but that's common sense. It's moving a lot slower. It's not going to make a ton of damage in that first part there. But overall, we have a huge track right there. It's bigger than most 9mm tracks, I'll say that much. It did curve. Both these curved down, which is interesting. But our second shot there, nothing impeded that penetration there. And we got about 14 1/4 inches. If it were moving straight, if we counted this with like a tape measure, it might be like more like 14 1/2, 14 3/4. But that's still adequate penetration. Now, 357 Magnum, typically rounds like this will actually energy dump and not go very deep, but the gold dot, the deep curl hollow point gold dot, kind of has a more controlled expansion. So it's actually a pretty good bullet for something like this. And what we got with that is about 15 1/2 inches. So really good performance with both of these. A little bit better with the 357 Magnum. However, you're kind of paying for that because there's a lot more recoil with the 357. So let's put on our fabric, put in our rib simulation, and see how these do in our real world simulation. All right, I'm cutting in here because I don't have footage from my main camera for the rest of this video. Everything worked fine to this point, but then for whatever reason, my main camera that I use, the footage is gone. It never stopped recording or anything like that. It's just not on my SD card. It's gone. So I don't know what happened there, but I had to cut in here, and I'm gonna put this video together the best I can because I still have the secondary camera footage, and that's the one where you see the, you know, the ballistic gel block up close, and you can see the targets being shot up close and all of that. So that's still there. So I'm cutting in here just to make a mention of that, and that at this point, what I'm gonna do here is we're gonna start just slow motion footage going through the fabric and the rib simulation, and then for shooting at the steel targets, you're just gonna see the targets. So let's keep going with this test. All right, now we have our real world simulation. 4 layers of sweatshirt material followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics that represent hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard to represent hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4 inch on the end of the back to represent hitting back ribs. Ideally, I want these bullets to stay within that back rib simulation without passing through. They do pass through they can go about 3 inches and it's still acceptable, but I'd rather them stay in that first rib simulation or the rear rib simulation. So let's see if we get here with our 45 ACP real world simulation. No velocity read. And that's why I don't like to do this, because these things are finicky. You have to move them over right perfectly or else you don't get reads. 357 Magnum real world simulation. 1242 feet per second. Let's go take a look. Wow, I was not expecting that at all with these. I thought for sure, especially with that velocity rating, that 357 Magnum would easily, handily expand. It did not, and we see a huge, massive track right here where it's tumbling. So that doesn't look that good at all. I mean, it's not designed for a short barrel, but at those velocities, you would think that it would have done really well. Now, with our 45 and this first 3-inch piece, there's no energy dump. There's a little bit with our 357 Magnum, so just hitting a lot harder with that 357. But look at this. That's terrible. You'd think you would see some level of expansion, especially with that 357 Magnum. And again, they are not meant for short barrels, and I can imagine that's why. These are why short barrel variants exist, but you would still think at the velocity numbers we're getting that it should have done better. So neither of these really what I would call over penetrated, but we got with our 45 ACP right at about 15 inches. So that's a pretty good number for penetration. Now with our 357 Magnum, we're at about 20 and a half. So we're within that limit there of, you know, what we want to see. It didn't penetrate too far past that, probably tumbled through here. And we can see it keyholing through. So not great performance with either of these, but I'm gonna have to say, I think based on what I'm seeing here, the 45 looks a little better when it comes to typical things we want to see, not penetrating too far. A lot of people, when I say that, they're like, I don't care if it passes through because nobody's behind them, blah blah blah. And that's not even what I'm talking about. You know, if you penetrate way too far, it generally means that you're causing very little effect, little damage where you want it to be. And the more over penetrates, typically the less damage it causes in here, either from, you know, you want it to tumble, we want it to expand, we want it to do something where it's tearing through, not just cleanly zip through. And over penetration almost always means it cleanly zipped through, didn't cause a lot of damage here. But yeah, looking at this, I would say our 45 is a little more acceptable. So let's pull these out of the block. I'll take a close look at these bullets, and I'm going to shoot our steel and see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. Alright, so here's a close-up look at these bullets going through plain gel. Here's our 357 Magnum, here's our 45 ACP. So both of these had pretty good expansion performance with plain gel. So there's definitely enough velocity there to cause these to expand out. And this is why I always do a plain gel shot, because sometimes when I used to do just fabric, and then I would move on to like fabric and rib simulation, everything would fail to expand. So it's good to see what the manufacturer wants these to look like. And judging by this, they look fantastic. But when we go through our real world simulation, not so much. 45 ACP, 357 Magnum. And looking at this, I'm going to say our 45 did way better, because there's some level of expansion starting with the 45, and with the 357 there's absolutely none. I mean, you could argue that this tumbled through this way, and you know, the size of that tumbling 357 is wider than that 45, but that's a really unpredictable way to measure that. And just looking at this right here, yeah, I would say our 45 did better. Now, the 357 had more energy. That could account for more damage, more stopping effect. That's possible. But typically, most handgun velocities, you're really looking at the size of the expansion. That's what the bigger factor usually is. And if I had to look at all this here, I'm going to say the 45 did better. So that's a close-up look at those bullets. Alright, so to sum up this ammo and the performance that we got out of it, interesting. I say that in every video because I always find something interesting about every single one of these tests. They rarely play out the way that you would think they would. And one of the biggest surprises is to have a round of 357 Magnum 125 grain moving at 1242 feet per second fail to expand. That's pretty much a first, and that's because it's using that deep curl hollow point gold dot. Completely different bullet than the original gold dot, or the one you see in 9mm. It's just designed to expand at much greater velocities. And if you put A regular gold dot, like they use in the 9mm with the big hollow cavity, that would pretty much fragment apart at 1242 feet per second. So it's, you know, it's hard to get a good round out of a snub to work with that particular bullet. So judging from that, I'm going to say that our 45 was the better round here. We had a lot better accuracy on the target, especially at distance. Everything felt right. The recoil was pretty low, and it did everything we really wanted it to do, except it didn't expand huge out of the going through the real world simulation. But for the most part, you know, we got expansion with the plain gel shot. We got a little bit of expansion going through the real world simulation, but most importantly, we had good penetration and it didn't over penetrate. So looking at that, that's a pretty good round. Now the 357 Magnum, you could say, well, it tumbled, therefore it created a lot of damage and all of that. It didn't really technically over penetrate more than what I want to see. But, you know, it's just not quite as good of a round because the recoil was brutal. When I was shooting from 40 yards, it was hitting like 8 feet high. And also, like, it became almost impossible to control very effectively. It hurt quite a bit to shoot, so definitely not optimized for a short barrel. But it's good to just test everything, and that's one thing that people sometimes miss. They'll see one of my videos and be like, why didn't you test this one? Why didn't you test that one? And I'm thinking to myself, why don't you look back at my older videos? Why are you coming in this one? And because I'm testing everything down the row, testing everything. And with this, not so good out of short barrels, but the 45 was decent. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.